This is Share the Vision, presented by the Resource Center, a discussion of the programs and services of the Resource Center and about issues related to individuals with disabilities. As this program is broadcast today, we are just a short time away from an event called Breaking the Stigma, a community outreach event planned for the Celeron Fire Hall. And the subtext on the poster that announces this says, "Love the addict, hate the addiction." There is a profound opioid and heroin crisis in our community. We are going to talk about this event and some aspects of this crisis over the next half an hour here on Share the Vision. Joining me to begin, Steve Watterson, Community Relations Director at the Resource Center. Steve, we're taking on some serious work today.
Yes, we are, Des, and thanks for making yourself available. And the timing's pretty good that our show is airing today from 11:30 to noon, and from 1 to 7 this afternoon is the Breaking the Stigma event at the Celeron Fire Hall, as you referenced.
I want to begin with Nicole Drosdale, who's a mental health and substance abuse clinician here at the Resource Center. She joins me as we record at the Kappa building at 880 East 2nd Street in Jamestown, just a couple of days before broadcast and this event. Nicole, thank you for taking the time to speak to me today.
Thank you very much for being here and helping address this important topic as we prepare to pull the community together and really take a united stance in how we want to address the addiction problem that we find unfolding here in Chautauqua County.
I'm going to ask you some questions first, but also in the room with us is Jeff Axelson, a forensic mental health case manager and peer advocate here at the Resource Center. Jeff, I'll just have you say hello on that microphone for a moment.
Hello.
If anything comes up in my questioning of Nicole that you want to jump in on, don't hesitate to add. You have credentials, experience in this particular area for many years. Nicole, tell us a little bit about your background and experience in teaching and helping in the area of substance abuse.
My background actually includes several years where I spent working in the schools with kids kindergarten through 12th grade in a prevention position where we discussed about the dangers of drugs and alcohol. We talked about resistance skills, how to say no, how to resist peer pressure, but also giving them a really practical knowledge of what addiction means and how it can affect their lives. And it was a beautiful and a difficult experience because as each year progressed in that position, I learned more and more that the children I was working with knew a lot more about firsthand experience about drugs and alcohol abuse in the home than what I was bringing to the table.
Wow, that's a little frightening. Day to day, today, your work here as a mental health and substance abuse clinician, you are helping people deal with these issues all the time?
In my present position here with the Resource Center, I'm a mental health clinician, and many of the clients I work with struggle with what are called co-occurring disorders, which means not only is there an addiction present of some sort, but there's also other mental health related issues such as depression or anxiety, or what is oftentimes the case with folks struggling with addiction is there's a history of trauma. Okay, a lot of the folks coming into this building have experienced extreme loss, difficulty, tragedy in their life, and they have, as they have grown up and gone through their teen years and into adulthood, tried to find the best way they could to cope with that kind of pain. And more oftentimes than not, what we found is that these folks would turn to things such as alcohol, such as marijuana, such as opiates, things that were, kind of releasing them from this pain, this trauma, these struggles they're experiencing, and kind of masking the symptoms that they just didn't want to deal with.
What is it that has led to the heroin and opioid crisis in our community right now from your perspective, Nicole? Is it those things that you just mentioned, or are there other factors that have led to this extraordinary time that we are living through?
Well, I think that there's many factors that have all kind of created this environment that we're experiencing. First, and I was talking with Jeff earlier today, we're talking about how culturally the experience or the initiation into drugs has changed for kids over the last 20 years. From the time where I was a young person, the primary gateway drugs were things like marijuana, tobacco, and alcohol. But what we have seen is, for a lot of different reasons, that opiates and also stimulants became readily available on the market in the early 90s, and young people quickly knew that here was something they could take that would make them feel different, and it was easy to get a hold of. Whether it was mom and dad's chronic pain medicine or it was selling their stimulants that they were taking for attention deficit, kids knew very quickly, hey, here's something I can take and I can hide. It doesn't smell like tobacco. It doesn't smell like marijuana. I don't have to hide it like alcohol. And so we have seen a shift in what a gateway drug means in the last 20 years. Kids are starting a lot younger, but they're also starting a lot heavier drugs. I had met young people that had already begun to experiment and sneak things out of their parents' cabinets, and they were third, fourth graders, so we were talking 7, 8 years old, trying things, or even depending on the environment they were growing up, parents might have been thinking it was funny to hand their kid a beer and say, here, have a sip, or things like that, very, very early on. So the initiation has changed. Culturally, we've changed. But there's also a lot of other things that have happened that have created this environment for addiction.
There are many, many controversial issues in our culture today in law enforcement regarding addiction in terms of how we approach those people who are addicted, whether they should be subject to penalty or offered some kind of counsel or therapy or rehabilitation. What do you think we should do to help those who are caught now to stem this epidemic from growing any further?
Well, addiction is one of those issues that kind of comes in and takes over. And so when a person comes in here for a mental health treatment, we approach it as a multi-prong approach. Our health homes caseworkers help meet their basic needs as far as helping secure housing and utilities and all those things, because when we're in a financial crisis, it's hard to make any good changes in our life. But then the mental health folks are there to kind of be there to address depression and anxiety and the reasons behind the addiction. Why is it so hard for you to cope? Why is it so hard to interact? And we do a lot of work there addressing the mental health background. But then we also have a great Suboxone program within this agency where we help address the addiction issues. We help folks that are struggling through groups, through individual therapy, and through also Suboxone therapy address the addiction side. So this isn't like a one approach, single approach. It's multi-pronged. We're really trying to help people in their environment, realizing that addiction doesn't exist by itself and therefore it can't be fixed by itself.
I want to have Jeff Axelson come right up to that microphone now. Jeff, as I mentioned earlier, is a forensic mental health case manager and peer advocate here at the Resource Center. Jeff, listening to the things that Nicole has said to us so far, what would you like to add answers to some of the same questions? What are your thoughts or feelings at this moment?
Well, I think Nicole hit right on it. Our society has, and this has existed for decades, we're a medicated society, especially since, the 70s and 80s. Rather than learn the coping skills, we take a pill. And it's so common. You want to lose weight, you take a pill. You can't sleep, you take a pill. It's part of the miracles of modern medicine where we have the access to all these different drugs. Obviously, doctors, they want to alleviate pain and suffering. That's their job. But the downside is that people, they've lost their coping skills. We've had depression and anxiety in our society for, as long as society's existed. But today we try to medicate it away, whether it be alcohol, whether it be marijuana, or whether it be opiates. And opiates in particular are very effective because you don't feel anything. They stop all the pain.
The current crisis in our community has been highlighted by certain controversy, argument over naloxone, Narcan, the drug that can be potentially used if someone overdoses with heroin in particular to bring them back. Have I described it correctly?
Yeah. It reverses the effects of the opiate, whatever it might be.
What, you, Jeff Axelson, Nicole Drosdale, what is your opinion of the use of that particular medication?
Obviously, it saves lives. But like any drug, it can be abused. It can be used in inappropriate ways.
What are obviously the appropriate uses would be someone who has overdosed and been brought back. What would an inappropriate use count?
Well, for example, an opiate addict having it on hand in case I overdose.
There's definitely the idea where maybe this is a poor comparison, but when the person who has a binge eating disorder says, well, I can eat anything I want today because I know I'm therefore going to binge. An opiate addict who says, I'm going to binge on heroin tonight, but I have Narcan to save me in case I OD in the process.
Exactly.
It's rather than setting limits and moderation beforehand,
Exactly.
it's, well, I think I'll try and problem solve this after the fact.
See, opiates in particular, the reason they're so dangerous is because for an addicted person, they have to use practically a lethal dose to get the desired effect. That's the way the addiction works. Okay? That's where they start, when they talk about one is too many and 1,000 is never enough. That's what they're hitting on. They get the taste, they like the feeling, they want to do it again. But when they do it again, their body has started to build a tolerance, so they need to do more to get the desired effect. Eventually, you have heroin addicts, for example. They are using just to feel normal. They're using just to not be sick. But when they've developed that high of a tolerance, they have to use a lethal dose to get the desired effect. And like we've just had here in the last few weeks, we've had, I believe the number is 8 people have overdosed. I suspect there's either a very, very powerful heroin out there, or it's been laced with, like, say, fentanyl, and they're not aware of it.
The part of the community response has been people are outraged that they take umbrage at using community resources, police officers responding, EMTs, whatever, and using this drug to bring people back because they've, at least the comment has been made that it is not the right use of community resources to do that. Do you understand that criticism?
I suppose. But what would they prefer? We let the people die?
There's a lot of different perspectives out there, and what I love to introduce about addictions is a disease model, and I really feel like that's what this event is drawing on, is love the addict, hate the disease. And those of us who experience, and I can imagine that most of our listeners here today in one way or another have someone that they love dearly, very close to them, that struggles with addiction. And it's hard because addiction is a disease that comes in and not only destroys the person struggling with the disease, but everyone around them who loves them. And the fallout just continues and extends. So as a community, only us pulling together can we address an issue that is affecting so many.
Yeah, more and more addiction is being re-identified. I think the latest one was that it is a chronic progressive brain disease, because it changes your thinking. It changes the way the brain works. It changes the way the brain communicates with the body.
I would only add one other point to this discussion, and it has been relayed to me, told to me this way, that preceding addiction comes a choice. And a person chooses to attempt to do something that is known to be potentially dangerous and hazardous and addicting, and does so anyway.
Not necessarily. Okay? If my friends are doing it, then it must be okay. My friend did it, nothing bad happened to them, so it must be okay. And every addict, almost every addict, they think or they say out loud, that happened to them, but that won't happen to me. I'm being careful.
And I love this question, and I'm so glad you brought it up, because the demographics of how people become addicted to different things is diverse. Okay, this isn't something that just targets one population. There are many, many factors in a person's lives that lead them to the point where addictions develop. In some of my clients, it might be that they grew up in an environment where addiction was commonplace. It was part of their culture. Other folks, it might be one of these things where peer pressure in their friendships, where they started out experimenting as a child, but then it really took off from there, and they lost control very quickly. Other people that have experienced things like trauma and mental health difficulties have maybe from the time of being very, very young not known how to process the pain they are in, and this was a way that they could find some relief from their mental health and their suffering. And then another population that we see are those, and And I meet these folks every day where it was a simple fall, a simple break, a fall off a ladder, something where they were in severe pain, a long-term recovery, and they were prescribed things that eventually their body just developed an addiction to. And so, I think when we talk about addictions, people are so often just want to get stuck on who's to blame, and I think we got to focus on the solution, what we can do to pull together to fix it.
Yeah, about 80% of the people who end up addicted to heroin started out from a prescription medication. About 80%.
And that crosses all age ranges?
All age range, absolutely. Addiction is all-inclusive. It does not discriminate.
Jeff, you came in just before we started the recording with some extraordinary statistics that you had compiled informally in your work here at the Resource Center as a forensic mental health case manager and peer advocate, just about the last few weeks and the impact of heroin and opioids in our community. Would you mind giving those statistics to our listeners?
Well, in regards to my work with the court, for example, about half of the individuals that I have are opiate dependent or have had problems with opiates. Almost everyone I see has a substance abuse disorder, right? But the majority of them have a mental health condition. About 90% of people with mental health conditions also have a co-occurring substance abuse disorder.
When you say work with the court, flesh that out a little bit for me.
The treatment court system, drug court, mental health court.
You're a part of that.
Yes.
And in terms of the toll that heroin or opioids have taken in our community over the last few weeks, you were talking about...
Well, it's been over the last few years. This has been brewing. It's been brewing for some time.
And there have been an extraordinary number of overdoses and fatalities just
recently, yes.
Because of what you suggested earlier, that there may be a very powerful dose of this, and it is an unregulated drug. It comes in from heaven knows where. And
most of our drugs come from Mexico. It's controlled by the cartels.
And I think also what we're seeing is the recent overdoses and deaths here in Chautauqua County very much mirror what we're seeing in the larger urban areas. I mean, I've been reading reports out of Pittsburgh and Buffalo, both
nationwide,
in the last month. And they have both experienced extreme increases in opiate overdoses within the last few years. We're not talking increases of 10, 20, 30%. We're talking increases in deaths in the range of 300, 400% increases over the years prior.
That's true.
As mental health professionals, both of you, let me ask you this. Does law enforcement have the appropriate role now in terms of what police agencies and others are doing in terms of arrests and stings and all the resources we are putting into taking drugs and drug users off the streets?
Well, at one of the forums recently, Chief Schnellings from JPD, he basically said that we cannot do this. Law enforcement cannot do this alone. It's multifaceted. Multifaceted. Yes, there's a law enforcement component, and yes, there's obviously a need for drug busts, drug raids. They have to do that. But they can't win the war on drugs from a law enforcement perspective. It won't work. You have to have the treatment aspect. You have to have the prevention aspect. So just as there's many, many reasons for addiction, that's our disease, if you will, there's many, many reasons for the cure. It's multifaceted.
Jeff Axelson and Nicole Drosdale, I want to thank you both very much for your time, your insights into this problem in our community, and what you have shared with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Nicole Drosdale had an appointment she needed to run to as we record Share the Vision today at the Kappa building, but taking her place right now is Julia Perkins. She is one of the organizers of the event that is coming this afternoon at the Celeron Fire Hall called Breaking the Stigma, the community outreach event presented by Chautauqua Advocates for Addiction Assistance. Julia, thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Give me a thumbnail background, a biography of your experience, your interest, why this is important to you.
Well, I think many things are born out of people stepping up to the plate and being active, and usually it is something that touches them close to their heart and close to home, which it did. My son was dating a young lady whom many people in the community have heard of. Her name was Kristen Tibbetts. She passed away just a short year ago, and it broke my heart and that of many others. Obviously including my son's. I had taken Kristen to ECMC, and she was denied access to help. So the journey began. A friend of mine and I watched the Recover Jamestown movie last summer while I was still grieving, etc. And we decided then that there was so much talk about what isn't happening in the community that we decided that we should try to bring a positive light, if there is any, to get things going, to break the stigma, to get people talking, to get agencies together, all of the wonderful help agencies that we have in the community, and showcase those so that the addicts and their families all know that there is help here, and more importantly, how to access that help.
What do you hope to accomplish as this is broadcast this afternoon from 1 to 7 at the Cellar on Fire Hall?
Well, we have several things on the lineup for this event. We've already had one event, which was August 30th at the 100-acre lot last year. We decided then that we would continue these events, continue to break the stigma, continue to get people talking, to embrace what we do have here, even though we are desperately in need of more services, more long-term services. The problem in our community is here. I feel very strongly that we shouldn't have to be outsourcing all the time people who are ready and in need of help to places in other states.
Will there be speakers this afternoon?
Yeah, we have several speakers lined up.
What will they talk about? Who will they be?
We have people who are in recovery to lend us some hope. We have a speaker who is from Erie who has lost a child to addiction. We also have a few people stepping up to the microphone to let the community know what their services are. And we also, Julie Epperson will be holding 2 Narcan classes back-to-back at 4 and 5 p.m.
Tell us about Julie. Who is she?
Julie Epperson is a county health professional who is trained in teaching the Narcan classes. She will be able to teach you how to use the nasal Narcan, and you will go home with the kit.
Jeff Axelson and Nicole Drosdale and I talked about Narcan a little earlier in this program. What is your opinion about that medication and its use?
Well, I know that it has saved many, many lives. Just like anything else, say if someone's in a diabetic coma or if someone is having a heart attack, the time to get that medication into them is crucial. And if we can save a life, we can save a life. There isn't always the time to call 911 or get another professional. If you see someone slumped over in the seat, it's not going to hurt them, even if you don't know that they are, in fact, overdosed, if it's administered.
In the interest of time, I would just like to ask you to give me some pointed answers to the following questions. What is law enforcement's role in helping the community through this addiction crisis? Do you think that police agencies are doing the right things? Is there more that they need to do to help?
That's a tough one. I'm sure that they are doing everything that they can do. I think that this addiction has, the amount of drugs that are coming into our city. Jamestown has been known to be a drug hub for a number of years based on our location. I know that they're doing everything that they can. I'm sure I would not want to be facing what they have to face day in and day out.
What is the role of those who care, such as you found yourself in, when they see these serious addictions happening around them? What should loved ones do?
There again, the places that addiction takes people is heartbreaking and often very difficult. But most of all, continue what we stand for, what I stand for is love the addict, hate the addiction, try to separate the two. That does not mean that we should enable or allow bad behavior to happen in your home, but do try to realize that the things that someone who's caught up deeply and heavily in their addiction is driven by their addiction, not by them. It is a disease. It is a disease that heavily affects their brain. And what I did was just continued to say that when you are ready for help, I'll be here and I'll try to help you. I will get you the help you need, or try to get you the help you need when you're ready. But in the meantime, I can't have you in my home and watch you destroy yourself.
What is the community's role, the non-connected community, those who do not have loved ones who are dealing with addicted problems, all the rest of us? What should we do?
Educate yourselves. Try to be understanding. Education is first and foremost. We bring so much light to all kinds of other diseases and disorders that people begin to understand slowly but surely, and then have some type of compassion for what's happening around them. So come out and support your friends who are affected by it. I don't think there's anybody in our community right now today that doesn't know someone that hasn't been affected.
Jeff Axelson from the Resource Center remains in the room with us as we record this at the Kappa Building today. I will offer this question to you, Jeff, if you want to chime in on it as we come into the final minutes of our show today. I'd be happy to have you do that too. What's the addict's role? Does that person, he or she, have a role to play too? Does willpower count in this? What can they do?
Another tough question.
I'm sorry for all the tough questions, but they're ones the community is asking of me.
Of course. I'm not a healthcare professional. I am just a person who has been touched by the addiction around me and seen so much that has happened. The addict's role versus willpower. In all the research I've done, yes, of course, the first time they decide to use is, of course, their will. After that, from what I understand, it is not. Heroin is extremely addictive, physically and emotionally. After that, very possibly first time, they don't have the will on their own. It takes a great amount of disparity for them to find their way into recovery. And through this event, we're only hoping that more and more people will find their way to recovery, that it will open up the dialogue between families and friends, and that people feel comfortable to say, look, I really have a problem and I need help and I need your support.
Julia, thank you for your courage.
Thank
your
you.
commitment in bringing these issues to the fore, creating events like the one that will unfold later today as this has been broadcast. And thank you for sitting down. We met each other 15 minutes ago. I put some very tough questions to you, and I'm grateful to you for your honest responses. Jeff, anything that you would like to add to anything that Julia has said here on the end of our show today?
Well, you mentioned earlier what the addict's role is, and if there's a choice in it. Asking an addict not to use, you might as well ask them not to breathe. That's what happens. It is a chronic brain condition, and it does take over the mentally, physically, and emotionally, and spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
We must close. Steve Watterson, it has been an extraordinary half hour here, and we've barely touched the surface on a lot of these things, but thank you for this opportunity.
Oh, yeah, very enlightening. And just a reminder to folks from the event going on 1 to 7 this afternoon at the Cellar on Fire Hall. There'll be lots of agencies represented. The Resource Center will have a table there, so stop by if you want to know more. Also, Dennis, I just want to let you and the listeners know we are planning a similar educational event for Monday, April 11th from 4:30 to 6 at our facility on East 2nd Street, and we'll have some more details about that, maybe even focus a show on it between now and then.
I look forward to it, and thank you very much to Steve Watterson and Nicole Drosdale and Jeff Axelson from the Resource Center and Julia Perkins from Chautauqua Advocates for Addiction Assistance. Thank you all for sharing the vision today.